The United States was born after winning the Revolutionary War in 1783 against its mother country of Great Britain. Thus, the United States has been active in international affairs since its inception, making foreign policy a forefront issue. Foreign policy is a government strategy in dealing with other nations, including negotiating trade, defense, and humanitarian issues. In United States history, there are 10 presidents who have had the most influential foreign policy in shaping U.S. relations with the rest of the world. At number 10 is George Washington. The first president of the United States set the precedent for foreign policy, although not all presidents would follow. George Washington heavily advised against interfering in international affairs or forming alliances with other countries. In his farewell address to the nation, Washington warned his successors against unnecessarily aligning themselves with foreign powers, saying, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world." He believed this would lead to wars, bad trade deals, and tensions with other nations. Overall, Washington stressed neutrality and peace, which the following presidents would attempt to lead by, but ultimately a superpower status would entitle the United States to interfere in Central America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Number 9, Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt fought in the Spanish-American War as a Rough Rider and furthered imperialism in America. Theodore Roosevelt adopted a big stick foreign policy due to his motto, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," meaning to be diplomatic and persuasive, but also to use force when necessary. TR cited the Monroe Doctrine as a reason to protect weak Latin American countries from European interference, but truly used it as justification to have U.S. presence in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and Haiti, and especially Panama, where the U.S. oversaw the construction of the Panama Canal in 1906. Rather than protecting these vulnerable countries, U.S. influence in Central America often resulted in resentment and revolts that would last for decades to come. Number 8, Woodrow Wilson. Entering office, Wilson had limited experience in international affairs, but proved to have one of the most influential foreign policies. Wilson attempted to stay neutral when war consumed the majority of Europe in 1914, but when German U-boats began to target American ships, Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. Although the U.S. joined the Allies in 1917 and World War I ended with an Allied victory in 1918, Wilson was a major player in the peacemaking process. Wilson proposed the League of Nations, which would be an international organization that resolved issues and promoted peace so a worldwide war could be prevented. However, at home, Congress strongly opposed Wilson's League of Nations, believing that involvement in an international organization would sacrifice the needs and interests of the American people. Despite Wilson's failure to put his peaceful plans into place after the war, his groundbreaking diplomatic ideals set the foundation for worldwide peace organizations like the United Nations, which the U.S. joined in 1945. Number 7, George W. Bush. When George W. Bush was first elected into office in 2000, he did not intend to focus on foreign policy during his term. However, the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001 changed that. Bush declared a global war on terror to eliminate the threat of growing terrorist groups like al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Later expanding the war on terror, Bush unveiled his Bush Doctrine, which said that the United States would engage in preemptive military attacks on any country that demonstrated terrorist activities towards the United States, like Iraq, North Korea, and Iran, also known as the Axis of Evil. The Bush Doctrine hoped to locate terrorist groups and attack before they posed a serious threat to the United States and also encouraged the spread of democracy. The war on terror has been winding down in recent years with the gradual withdrawal of troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, but current President Joe Biden has announced that all troops will be removed from Afghanistan by September 11, 2021 to officially end America's longest war. Number 6, Richard Nixon. Although prior to his election as president, Richard Nixon took a strong stance against communism, during his presidency he was determined to make peace with the Soviet Union in a policy called détente and to bring an end to the Vietnam War. Tensions between China and the Soviet Union were increasing, so Nixon developed a plan of triangular diplomacy in which forging peace in either China or the Soviet Union would subsequently lead to peace in the other, due to the fear of two enemies forming an alliance. Nixon became the first president to visit China in 1972 and officially recognized the People's Republic of China, which soon led to peace talks in Moscow and the formation of the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which was an agreement to control the growth of nuclear arms. In Vietnam, Nixon had a plan of Vietnamization, which included preparing and arming the democratic South Vietnamese to defend themselves against the communist North Vietnamese while American troops withdrew gradually. During this period, world leaders viewed Nixon as an effective diplomat and believed that only he could have made the trip to China and the Soviet Union and emerged with results. At number 5, Harry S. Truman. After the untimely death of his predecessor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman was left to end the war in the Pacific and negotiate terms for a post-World War II Europe. Many Western European nations were left economically and militarily devastated after the war, and Truman feared the Soviets would take advantage of their fragile state and establish a communist government. As a result, in 1947, Truman revealed his Truman Doctrine, which stated that the United States would offer aid to recovering European nations with democratic governments. This set the precedent for the U.S. containment policy that dominated foreign affairs for the next 42 years and also marked the unofficial start of the Cold War, a decades-long struggle between the United States and the Soviets to spread their opposing ideologies of democracy and communism. When North Korea invaded the democratic South Korea in 1950, the first proxy war of the Cold War began. The UN met, and their first ever decision as a council was to send troops to South Korea, the majority of them American. The movement by Truman into the first military action in the Cold War demonstrated to the Soviet Union and to the world that the United States was committed to defending democracy and fighting communism. Even today, the United States has stressed relations with communist North Korea and their insistence on building nuclear weapons. Number 4, William McKinley. In 1897, the size and economy of the U.S. had grown drastically, and President William McKinley began to look abroad to expand the country. When the Cubans revolted against the oppressive Spanish government, Americans grew concerned over humanitarian issues, but also of the safety of American business investments. The United States officially supported Cuba and sent ships to blockade the ports, causing Spain to declare war. After 3 months of mostly naval battles, what became known as the Spanish-American War ended with a U.S. victory in the Paris Peace Treaty, resulting in the annexation of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico from Spain, and Cuba as a U.S. protectorate. The victory over a major global powerhouse and the expansion into foreign territories set a new foreign policy for the United States known as imperialism, in which the country was destined to expand its size and power. The efforts of William McKinley and the victory in the Spanish-American War made the United States a prominent player on the world stage and began the superpower status it is known for today. Number 3, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. For the first 6 years of FDR's presidency, he was focused on bringing the nation out of an economic depression. However, he also kept an eye on Germany, Japan, and Italy in the 1930s, noticing their increasingly aggressive behavior. When Britain and France became involved in the war against Germany, FDR felt obligated to send aid to his allies and established the Lend-Lease Act, which offered weapons and supplies without violating the United States' neutrality. However, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, Congress declared war on Japan. As soon as the United States entered the war, FDR began planning for a post-war world and drew inspiration from Wilson's League of Nations and formed the United Nations, an international organization to discuss worldwide issues and prevent major wars. Roosevelt's establishment of the United Nations has led to diplomatic discussions today between the countries of the world and allows for negotiation before unnecessary military action. At number 2, Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, it was clear that détente and containment policies were not effective in preventing Soviet expansion. Reagan adopted a policy called the Reagan Doctrine that did not simply hope to contain communism, but to actively fight against it wherever possible. In the fight against the Soviet Union, Reagan believed it was time for the United States to go on the offensive directly against the Soviet Union, so his plan included increasing defense spending by 7%, an almost $1 trillion increase. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union in 1985, he realized that the Soviet economy and political atmosphere could only recover with improved superpower relations. After Reagan and Gorbachev met and negotiated the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, Cold War tensions lessened, and the war officially ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Reagan's aggressive tactics and negotiating skills led to the peaceful resolution of a 40-year-long conflict. At number 1, we have James Monroe. The Monroe Doctrine was the method of foreign policy introduced by President James Monroe to Congress in 1823. Taking inspiration from George Washington's policies of neutrality, the three elements of the Monroe Doctrine contain the idea of separate spheres of influence between the New World, which consisted of the United States and Latin America, and the Old World, which consisted of most of Europe. It emphasized non-colonization, or the concept that Europe would not attempt to colonize the Western Hemisphere, and in return, the U.S. would practice non-intervention, or the idea that the U.S. would stay out of European political and social affairs. Presidents since James Monroe have interpreted the Monroe Doctrine to mean that the United States should be the prominent colonizer in the Western Hemisphere rather than the Europeans, leading to the age of imperialism led by Presidents McKinley and Roosevelt, and justifying interference in Central and South America throughout the Cold War. Today, the federal government has debated intervening in communist Venezuela to restore democracy or risk involvement in a potential war. To remain neutral or interfere in world affairs is the central debate of modern foreign policy, and it is up to each president to decide if he or she will follow the Monroe Doctrine or make American presence known around the globe.